Hello and welcome back to the second talk of this meetup. The second session I will be joined by two of my colleagues, Bert and Jago, which will be going head to head on in a battle between Spring Boot and Quarkus. That's all I have to say for this. Give them a small silent round of applause from behind your keyboard, and here's the floor to Jago and Bert. Good luck.
Thank you for the applause behind the keyboard. Welcome to a head-to-head battle between Spring Boot and Quarkus. We all know who's going to win, right? My name is Bert Schrijver, and I love Spring Boot. And I'm joined here by Jago.
Yeah, my name is Jago Vreede, and I of course love Quarkus. Quarkus is a little bit like Spring Boot, only the big difference is that it's based on Java EE technology. So you can still use your enterprise skills with microservices. So that's kind of cool. So what are we going to build?
Yes, we're going to do a head-to-head battle by building an example application. So we need something that's kind of responsible for and respectable for what daily things we do as developers. So probably we need to do something with REST, maybe a service and a client. We need to do something with a database, stuff like this. So let's start with the beginning. We're going to expose a REST API to clients. This REST API needs to get data from a database. So we're going to use a repository that serves as a facade to connect to the database. We're going to need some data to get in the database, so we're going to call the coin market cap API, which provides us with exchange rates for various cryptocurrencies. We're going to build a REST client that is going to talk to this API, and to tie everything together, we have a service, and the service is going to basically serve as a facade for the REST API to expose calls to the REST client and to the repository to return stuff from our database. So we are going to our favorite place on the internet, start.spring.io, make a few clicks, press enter, download the zip file, and then we are greeted with a out-of-the-box working amazing Spring application. So it kind of looks like this. You have your tests already. There's a Spring application that will start everything up, and from then on we're ready to get going and build microservices. So we'll start with our controller, the REST controller. If you are familiar to working with Spring, this is fairly easy, right? So we have a couple of endpoints, one that returns all cryptocurrencies in the system, one that returns a specific one. We have one to clear the database, and we have an endpoint to update stuff from the database. So all this basically is an annotation with the REST API part. There's a method, and there's a call that delegates to the service. It's easy. It's basically child's play. Everyone can do it if you're familiar with how this works in Spring. So we need some configuration to connect to the database. This is only a few lines of configuration. We're going to connect to a local Postgres database. We have a username, password. That's it. And we have some configuration keys we're going to use later to connect to the API. All this in just a few lines of code. Beautiful, simple, and easy. So if we call the coin market cap API, we are greeted with this response. So we get an object that has a status object, so JSON with a status object, and there's a data array in there, and this data array basically contains an array of cryptocurrency information. So there's one entry in the example for Bitcoin. It has a name, a symbol, and a slug, which is a short name, and we're going to basically iterate over this array and populate our database with this. So, Jago is going to perform a live demo trapeze act now. So, what could go wrong if we do this with Quarkus?
What could go wrong? Yeah, of course. So let's first head over to the Quarkus website, because like you mentioned, Spring has a nice starter website. Well, Quarkus has the same thing. So let's get started. Well, what you first need is an IDE, blah blah, Maven, and let's get start coding. So first off, let's populate a group, and let's create an artifact. Let's call it crypto rates. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a REST endpoint. So we're going to use REST easy with Jackson. We're going to do some database stuff. So let's add Hibernate with Pinache. Pinache is the data layer for Quarkus that's comparable to the Spring one. Let's have a Swagger API, so that's in the Open API. So let's add that, and of course Hibernate needs to communicate with the database, which was a Postgres SQL JDBC driver. Well, great. I think we have it.
For me, as a Spring guy, that does look awfully familiar, Jago.
Yeah, this is absolutely the same. So, and we're of course gonna call a RestClient. So we're gonna actually call the Core Market Gap API. So let's add the RestClient with Jackson, and download the zip, extract the zip, and let's open IntelliJ. And let's see what's inside of that zip we just extracted. So we are greeted by a README, which is quite comprehensive, all kind of neat little things in there on how to get started. And what's inside of the application, we have a greeting resource, that's our REST endpoints. We do have some tests. Well, not going to need tests because we're excellent developers.
You don't need tests with Quarkus?
Absolutely not. No, that's for lame ass for later. So as you can see, we only have a greeting resource here, and this should work now. So let's head over to the terminal, and let's. Oh no. We first need to configure the application, of course. First, we need to configure the console because we are presenting in light mode, and Quarkus was made for the dark mode. So we need to darken the log to the console, otherwise it won't be readable. But hey, this is only a thing for the light mode that's being annoyed. And of course, we need to make the format of the console a little bit smaller so we can read it in presentation mode. But this should be done in real life. And of course we need the database, which almost looked the same thing as what you had, only now it's prefixed with Quarkus and instead of Spring, right? It's almost the same.
Yeah.
So this should be now enough to run the application. So let's see if I can open the terminal, which is really hard to do from inside of the presentation mode. So here we can just call Quarkus dev. And now the application will start up. And there we are. Quarkus has a nice dev console, so we can open the dev console in our Chrome browser. And here we have a dev console for Quarkus, and we can just head over to our Swagger API and just try this out. And hey, we have a hello rest easy. What was just in here? So, but this is not what we want. We want to return a list of cryptocurrencies. So let's start off with an empty list. With an empty list of course, objects for now. This should be enough. You had it on the root path, and this one was called with a path of all, I believe. So now it should be the same as what you had. So if we refresh Swagger, we now have a all endpoints. And let's try that one out, and we have a empty array. So that's kind of cool. So this was it for a REST endpoint. So how did we do? Spring Boot or Quarkus? What was the major difference? Spring had one annotation for the get resource. I had to do two. I had to have a get and a
I'm just going to get behind you.
and a path, but that's it. So they look quite similar, right?
Yeah, I'd say it's a tie because the dev console was nice, but apart from that, the experience of generating project, the REST endpoints, they all look very the same. So I'd say we're tied so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would next.
So what did you do with the API then?
Yeah, so we need to call the coin market cap API, which is basically a get request. We need to feed an API key as an HTTP header in the RestClient, and then we get, as a result, we get the format that we already showed before. So let's build this API client. So we're injecting two configuration keys, the API key and the URL to the CoinMarketCap API. Then we're going to build a map of the URL parameters we're going to feed into the request. Then we're going to create an HTTP headers object where we need to inject the API key. And then we call a REST template that will perform an HTTP exchange. So we're going to call the API URL, we're going to do a GET, and we are going to send the parameters and the headers. And we map the response to the coin market cap response, and we return the body of this response. So the coin market cap response basically is the maps to the data field in the JSON response. And over there, we map this to a list of our cryptocurrency object, which basically represents one item in the response. So over here, we have an ID, a name, a symbol, and a slug. But we're mainly only going to look at the name and the symbol for the sake of the demo. So that's it. One simple call, map to a small entity, and then we're ready to do something with the REST client. So how does this look in Quarkus? Let's see.
Well, I think
will it be as easy as it was in Spring?
I think there's way too much code there. So let's try and improve that.
I gotta give it to you, it was a bit verbose. The map for the headers, of the HTTP headers, the map for the parameters, it was a couple of lines of code for a REST call. On the other hand, it was not a trivial call, right? We need to add a header, we need to have parameters, we need to map it to something. So I think it was pretty okay.
Yeah, okay. So let's see. Let's copy and paste your piece of code.
I love that you said piece of code and not that other word that you would expect when you're saying piece of.
So what I copy pasted was the cryptocurrency entity without the entity class, because we're just gonna do the REST call for now. And we have the coin market cap response object that you created. Well, I got a nice ID upgrade, which I'll do later. So let's create a REST client in Quarkus then. So let's create a it's called coin market cap client or something like that. So first off, this is not a class. This will be an interface. So we can register this as a REST client. So, and of course we need to tell Quarkus which REST client it should be. Otherwise it would be very verbose. It would be the class name. So that's pretty annoying. So let's create a config key and head over to the configuration. And you had something with an API key and a REST endpoint. So
we probably need to revoke the API key after this talk.
Well, this is the second talk with the same API key, so this just fine. So let's say that it's the core market key API configuration key, and we're just gonna do REST here. So we can just do a get on a specific path. What was it? Listing / latest. And just return the coin market cap response object that you had.
So this kind of looks like how you write a REST service with Ajax REST, right?
This is only the interface. This is not implemented. This is just the interface for that. That's kind of cool. So listings, and we had some query parameters. So let's do that with Jago REST. So query parameters. We had a start, I believe, that's an integer, and we have another query param which is the limit, which is also an integer, and we had another query param which was convert, which is a string.
I'm missing the N in
convert, yeah.
I would like to see you silently fail the demo, but well, I'm going to help you a little.
Well, probably gonna fail the demo because I always forget some annotation somewhere. So this is our REST client. Only thing was there was a little header that you need to send because it will need to know the API. So we're gonna add a header. So we're gonna register the client headers, and this will be a CoinMarketCap header factory 3 or something like this. .class, and we're gonna create this class. This class needs to be application scoped, just like what you have in Spring. Maybe can you use application scope in Spring? I don't know.
Yes, I think you can, but I never use it because I don't need to.
No, you have service annotations, right?
Yeah.
So this gonna return a multi-valued map. So we're gonna add it, and we have the CoinMarketCap API header. API. This was the header that you need to send, and we need to fill it with the API key, which is not a string, but is a parameter.
So this is basically what I did in line in my client. You're doing this in a separate factory class.
Yeah. So we're gonna have a Spring API key, and with Spring you could just add value here. So let's call this a configuration property. And what is that configuration property? Well, this is this one, and we can just inject that here. And we have one problem. That's the unit test that's gonna fill. That's when it's gonna fill in later. Say bye to the unit test. This is a value, of course. A name, sorry. This should work. Why doesn't it work? Config property name. This is annoying.
I don't know, Jago. This is easy in Spring.
Yeah, this should be easy in Quarkus. So I don't know what's this complaining about. Let's. Yes, this is not the correct config property. So this is annoying. There we have it. So we need to have the micro profile config property in here. So,
From Java, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, so now we have our nice little REST client. So let's create the service here. Service. Actually, gonna call it CryptoService, cryptocurrency service, and let's create a. Let's inject it. Let's first inject the REST client because we're just gonna use this. So we have the coin market REST clients, and I saw you do some constructor injection.
Yeah.
So we can do that here. So can we create a constructor for that? But we need to tell it to inject a REST client because otherwise it starts to search for a just a normal bean and it can't find it. So this is a REST client. So there's a little annotation that we need to do here.
So this is how you instruct it to construct a REST client based on the interface definition.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's create a find all function. Let's import a normal list and just call the REST clients with listings, start with 1, return 500, and we're here in the Netherlands, so we're paying with euros. Just going to return this, but this is going to return the data of the data object, so we need to have data in here. So this is the response object, and I'm just going to return the data object and just ignore the other stuff that was in there. And instead of the empty lists, I want to return the actual REST call. So I'm going to do just something else. I can always do inject. So let's inject the cryptocurrency service. And now return the service dot find all. And this is no longer an object. This is now a cryptocurrency. And let's see what it does now. Woo. It can't find the service. So what did I do wrong? The service is of course a being, so that should be application scoped. So let's retry this.
So wait, so you fixed something and then you refreshed and it's there.
Yeah, so I broke something, I fixed it, and now it just keeps on running. So there's no issue there.
So how about restarting your application?
Why should I? It's still running.
It makes sense.
So what did it do? It's returned a empty.
This is the schema, right, that we're seeing now?
Oh, what is this schema?
Oh, yeah.
It says it can't find it, so that's really annoying. Let's execute it. And it can't find it. So
You got a 4.4, right? So is the REST URL correct? What did we put on the resource?
wait a minute. That's could be it, because if the CoinMarket API.
No, I meant in the greeting resource. What's the URI for the REST API? Is it /all?
It's /all, yeah. So /all will call the service, and service will call the RestClient. But if the CoinMarketCap API returns a 404, we return a 404. So that error is propagated to our application. So probably made a typo here. Let's try and find it. Listings.latest. Oh, great. Let's try it again. And well, there we have
a nice bunch of Java objects.
Yeah, that's nice. So that's the RestClient. So what's next?
Do we need to transform these Java objects to JSON? Because we're not returning JSON yet, right?
No, we're not returning JSON. That's
returning text plain.
Returning text plain. So let's fix that. So it's easy as returning the meta type, and now we have again a 406.
Not acceptable.
Not acceptable, because what's happening here is that Schrijver will call the API, and will call the API with the accept header of text. We're trying to return text, but well, that's no longer there. So change the media type to JSON. Let's try it out.
Takes a while, which is a good sign.
Yeah, because actually, yeah, great. So what's next?
So we now know that Bitcoin is still the #1 cryptocurrency according to CoinMarketCap.
Yeah, behind Ethereum. So that's kind of cool. So this is a RestClient. So what else did we get? What we got?
Databases. Oh, we need to first see who won. I think the RestClient was pretty nice and clean, what you showed there. So it was only like an interface that you need to implement.
Yeah, which was just Jago REST, so that's stuff you already know, because that was also what you're going to need when creating REST services. So actually you can share those interfaces. You can implement your interface if you're going to create the service itself, and then share the interface with your consumers, and they will have immediately a REST client that they can use. So that's kind of cool. And I don't have to write any Java code.
I think it was fairly clean. It was a little less code than I had. The construction of the headers was the same. So I'm going to give this one with just one minor win to Quarkus.
Yeah.
But I'll be coming back strong in the next chapter.
Yeah, let's try that.
So we're going to need to talk to a database. So this is the service. So the service basically ties the REST controller to our REST client and to our repository. So the service has a find all method that will delegate to the repository to return everything in the database. It has a clear method which will clear the database. It has a replace all, which will basically clear the database and then put the new list of cryptocurrencies in the database. And we have a call to update all the data from CoinMarketCap, and a find call to find one symbol in the database. So basically it's just delegating to the REST client and to the service. So the repository is well, it couldn't be any shorter, right? So we only extend the JPA repository, and we're saying, well, we're basically going to get cryptocurrencies and the ID is along, and we only put one interface method in here, and then we're done. So, could it be any shorter than this, Jago?
Let's try. So what Quarkus has is not a repository layer, but it has Panache, which is a Hibernate framework, especially built for Quarkus, I believe, because I haven't seen it anywhere else, which can make objects into repositories. So let's show that. So first let's start with the default entity, and this was a ID, right? So it now looks the same as you had in Spring.
Yep.
But instead of creating a repository, we can extend the entity class itself with a Panache entity base. And now we have our repository layer. So let's
Wait, so okay, I had an entity and a one-liner repository. You're going for even less.
Yeah, I have two words. I need to extend something and, well, a Panache entity base. So let's try and use that. So first off, we have a find all. So let's create a public voids update or something, which is going to take the data from the RestClient and let's put it in a variable. And now we want to save the cryptocurrencies. So cryptocurrency dot, because this is our repository, we can now say persist all. Persist and give it the list.
Okay, so it's a static call, right?
This is a static call to our repository. So it's using the entity manager of Hibernate, and we'll just it will just work.
Okay.
So before we need to insert all the cryptocurrencies in our database, as it is an update call, we're just gonna clear everything out. So we're gonna just delete all first. So there's also a convenience method that you get. It's the same thing with the Spring repository, right? And of course we can also do a find all. And this find result we want to have in a list. And we're done. But of course we want to have a clear function so we can see this all works. So cryptocurrency dot delete all. And let's make this a bit nicer. So we have a clear, we have an update, and we have a find all.
I know people are going to be itchy watching the screen while you don't fix the indentation. Thank you. Thanks on behalf of everybody who was itchy.
With OCD, yeah. So let's create a getter for the update function. And let's also create a getter for the clear function. And now, if we call this again, first off, if we refresh this, we have multiple methods here. We have the all, clear, and update. And if I call up all, there should be an empty database. That's cool. So when we call updates, well, just
We get an error.
we get an error.
Nice.
Why did we get an error? Because, well, we can actually see the error. There was a transaction required. And this is the annotation that I always forget. In the service, the service is application scoped, but doesn't have a transaction bound to it. So this needs to be transactional.
There was probably other in there automatically in some of the annotations I used in my app, I guess.
Yeah, you used service, which is a wrapper for application scope with a transactional and maybe even more, but now we know exactly what's going on. So we updated it, and so we can just do now the all, and now we get the stuff from the database instead of the actual REST client.
Nice.
So this was it, right?
Yeah.
This is what you built. Now we have it in Quarkus. So what do you think about repositories then?
It was nice, short and concise, I'd say. It was, well, I thought you couldn't go any shorter than I did, but you did. You didn't even need a repository.
No.
I do have my doubts about the static call to Panache. It is nice and short, but what if I want to replace it with somebody else? I don't know. It feels a bit weird to do this in a static call. How do you feel about this?
I feel the same. It's a little bit awkward at first, but well, you get used to it. But everything will work out.
You're saying it's a bit like Rivella. It tastes a bit weird, but it is good.
Yeah, eventually.
So I don't know.
So-
I'd say it's either a tie or maybe a small win for Quarkus if you can get over the itches you get from the static calls.
Yeah, if you like the static calls, well, then Pinache is your place to go. Otherwise, you can always implement your own repositories with just the plain old Hibernate, but there is no repository templating like Spring. So that's, well, this is what you get.
So what's the next round?
What's the next round? Testing!
Yes, testing. Testing is awesome with Spring. So in this case, I'm using Spring Boot test, where my environment gets basically spun up automatically, and I can make service calls that will use an in-memory database to basically test my database interaction. So it's a nice way to have like embedded integration testing. And you can also do integration testing where you spin up your Spring container and you can automatically call the REST endpoints that then where you verify that your container is working, that also work against the database in memory. So I'd say that this is fairly well doable, and the developer experience is pretty good here. So how's it looking, Quarkus? I'd say not that much different, right?
No, there is quite literally not much different. It's actually the same thing. It just spins up a container, it injects stuff. You can also inject mocks if you want, but it just behaves the same as a Spring Boot container. So I don't think that there's a winner here.
It's a tie, I'd say. Yeah. So am I going to win the next one?
I don't know. But I do have something nice to show you. We have a little bit of time. Very little bit. So let's go exit presentation mode for a second, because I need to copy paste the test that I removed a little while ago. So let's get that back. And have this back. So we now have a cryptocurrency test. Let's zoom in. That's the same thing we saw in our demo. So if you go back to the Quarkus terminal, we see a test paused here. So what we can do is resume the test. It will start up the testing, and it will find no test because I copy pasted this outside of the IntelliJ context. IntelliJ didn't see it. So if I break the test, for example, I actually change something. You see that it's running one of the two tests, and one test failed. So now the unit testing are part of the normal developer experience. So if I fix this test, the test will run, and I can see what actually happened with the testing. So running unit testing is now part of the developer experience inside of the console. Quarkus will also try to find the tests that are affected by your code changes. So running the test only that if you change some tests, then it will run that test file. And if you change some code, then it will try to figure out which tests have been run and run it that way. So you don't have to run every single test. So that's kind of cool. So does Spring has such a feature?
I'm not aware, but I think most IDEs can do some way of continuous test running as well.
Yeah.
I'm more of a person who changes some code, presses a shortcut to run the tests, and iterates like this. This saves you pressing the shortcut. I need to give it to you.
Yeah, and figuring out which kind of test, because if you have multiple tests hitting the same piece of code, then well.
Yeah, because this is smart in a way where it only runs the tests that are well, basically concerned with the change you made, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So I would typically have, I don't know, probably one test per class that I'm editing, and then running this test. So I'd say the workflow is kind of the same. This is a bit smarter.
Yeah, it's a kind of cool feature, but it's kind of a gimmick. So what you saw today was that I started the application only once. I didn't restart the application. So what Quarkus has out of the box is hot reloading. So the entire context of the application will remain, and only the code is swapped out and hot replaced. So as you can see here, the hot replacement time was half a second. And if we see a boot up time of the application that was around 2 seconds. So the hot reloading is a lot faster than starting up the application because it doesn't have to do a lot of checks. It can bypass a lot of stuff and only replace the stuff that well, actually makes sense to replace. That's kind of cool. So Spring.
We have this in Spring as well, right?
Yeah.
So the app maybe starts a little smaller, but it could have been just like, I don't know, maybe I was mining Bitcoins on my machine when I created this screenshot, right? It's a difference of, I think yours was also starting in like 3 seconds or something, right?
Yeah, it's quite similar. Spring Boot is a little bit, it's a little bit slower, but not that much. And in some cases, even faster. So
okay, 3 seconds. So obviously in Spring, auto reloading is also built in. If you select the Spring developer tools, then you get this for free. Once you build your project, it also auto reloads. And this takes, well, about a second, which is maybe a bit slower than it was in your case. But in your case, it was half a second, right? So I'd say that these are fairly comparable as well. So who wins here? I'd say it's a tie, unless if you're really impatient, then this half second might help. On the other hand, Quarkus is twice as fast, so.
Yeah. It's, I think, and also Quarkus has a little bit better understanding of what's going to happen. It also does the reloading on configuration changes and that kind of stuff, and you need to configure Spring to make that happen. But
yeah, I did notice when I was testing this in IntelliJ that I did need to run a build of the project so that the class, basically the compiled class has changed. Yeah. It wasn't automatically reloading once I saved the file, but it could have been my setup as well.
So, okay,
so we're already there, right? So I think we need to pick the final winner. Did Quarkus win or did Spring win? I'd say that we were pretty close, and I'd say that most of the concepts are not that far from each other. Let's ask a random attendee here in the room. Sander, what would you use for your company? Would you go for Spring Boot or Quarkus?
I would say Spring Boot, but not on technical matters.
Sander is going for Spring Boot, but not on technical matters. So, okay. Obviously, I'd say they're pretty comparable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're used to Spring, then I'd say it's fairly doable to switch to Quarkus, right? You just showed it. I'm still kind of like a Spring fan because that's what I know, but I think that Quarkus is a fairly worthy competitor as of now.
Yeah, especially if you have a company where you have a lot of code that's already written in Java EE, then a lot of those codes you can just port to Quarkus with not much that difficulty. Especially if you use CDI, for example, instead of the EGB annotations. So the migration path from a traditional enterprise application to Quarkus, to a microservice, is a lot smaller than if you would migrate your application to Spring Boot, because probably you're going to start over again, or well, not copy-paste that much of code.
So I guess it's time to go for questions from the audience, right?
Yeah.
What questions do we have?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you, of course, for this, let's say, a refreshing kind of presentation. In my opinion, I do think that we have to take into account a small penalty for Quarkus for having too many development errors during the demo. But, I'll approve that. To people watching, of course, please type your questions in the chat. And we do actually already have some questions. The first one is, does Quarkus have anything similar to the type configuration classes in Spring?
Type configuration, you have to help me here because I'm not a Spring developer, so maybe Bert can explain to me what type.
I'm not really sure what is being meant with the type configuration classes.
No, typed.
Typed. So you mean at configuration?
Yeah.
In Spring, obviously, you can build your own configuration classes to override, I don't know, selecting beans and specific behavior. Yeah. Is there like a comparable way in Quarkus with creating, I don't know, annotation-based configuration classes?
Yeah, absolutely. There is some similar mechanism in place. Yeah, absolutely.
The next one is about the testing. So there was this round with the database calls where a bit itchy with the database, the static call. But how would you test this? So with Panache.
Actually, the unit test that I showed was actually calling the database. If you don't configure anything, it will take your production properties and will use that in test. So that's really a bad idea. That's why you can also say configuration properties are only for development. So if you start the application and you have development properties enabled, then it will use that. And in test, you have different properties. So you will probably load up a H2 database and use that for your unit testing. And that's actually something that comes out of the box. Well, we have to include the H2 dependency, of course, but Quarkus will happily spin up a H2 container for you and load up the schema from Hibernate, or if you have Liquibase or Flybase, for example, you can use that to populate your database and just use it and test your database calls and your queries if you want.
I kind of like how this question somewhat explains my itch with the static calls, right? On the other hand, what are you going to test in a unit test with your database interaction? In my integration test, I was also spinning up an H2 container connecting directly to the database. I would say that you're a bit more flexible with selecting different implementations for what database you're going to, if you're not doing any static calls. On the other hand, if you during your test can bring up an H2 database, then integration style testing will work as well, I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I still think that, because of course static calls always a bit, because of the mocking, let's say, for example.
So if you want to use, for example, Mockito to mock out your repository, that's a good question. Usually what we did is hide those static calls behind an interface and mock that, but that's a bit of cheating, because usually we do a lot more that Pinoche can't handle. So Pinoche is fun for the base stuff. You can get a lot of functionality out of the box, but if it's complex queries, then you need to go back to Hibernate and
I guess that nothing stops you from solving this problem by adding another layer of indirection, right?
Yeah.
You can make a repository class that you instantiate and inject, and then make this repository class call the static methods in the from the repository. Then you could still swap out the repository class for a stun double.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would say that might
a little bit more code, yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, of course, Mockito actually does have functionality for static functionality. Static calls by recent.
Yeah, but every time you do this, a puppy gets killed, you know. So
that is true, though it's nicely scoped. But
only one puppy.
by only one puppy.
Yeah, only one puppy. So how does another one is how does Quarkus determine which run this let's say neat feature?
Yeah.
By static analysis, or does it actually instrument the code?
It actually tries to instrument some code. So it's quite a new feature. It's released in Quarkus 2. That's been released maybe last month or so. So they're still developing it, but it does some code analysis for some instrumentation based guessing what kind of test you want to run when your code changes.
Okay. Not related to this, but this is about the knowledge and the community. So somebody already mentioned that on Stack Overflow, the hits, and Google, the hits for Spring, are going to the millions. But if you start looking for Quarkus, it's in the thousands. Does this cause any problems or potential issues?
Not yet. I've been using Quarkus now for over a half a year in actual my day-to-day job. And everything that I wanted to look up, I could find online. So the questions that are relevant are being asked, and there is actually a community growing. If you asked me these questions 2 years ago when Quarkus started, then I would definitely say that it was still growing and still starting, and but it's catching up with Spring. Spring has a huge leap ahead of Quarkus, so it will take some time to catch up, or even get close to Spring. But the community is growing, and it's used more and more in the big companies that are using enterprise applications, which run on JBoss or WebSphere or WebLogic or whatever application server, which want to migrate to microservices. And this is the then obvious choice to use that.
Okay. We have another question regarding Spring versus Quarkus. Does Quarkus offer fine-grained control over bean context creation, like context configuration in Spring?
Do they mean like startup things, or?
I don't know. I don't use this much also in the Spring world.
Yeah, what's being used in Quarkus is CGI. It's a little bit less of the CGI spec than the full CGI spec, but a lot of features that you're probably going to use, like post-construct or pre-construct and that kind of stuff, is available there. And also application hooks for application startup and application shutdown, that kind of stuff is already is there, and you can use it. It's a limited subset of the full CGI implementation, but it's very well usable, and it's well, it's
Yeah, so it actually got the second. It's about the context of testing. So there, apparently, you can.
Oh, you can like say this bean is only used in a test context, and this is used in a production context.
Yeah, you can configure it with a test property, and you can say, for example, an alternative for a specific bean. So yeah, it's
Okay. I don't see any more questions, but I think you both left your Twitter handles in the slides, so again, they can reach out to you.
absolutely.
I think that's at least it for this presentation. So I want to say again, thank you for this nice presentation. So everybody can give another small round of applause behind their keyboards.
Yeah.
And let us know in the chat who you think won. Did you think Spring win, or did you think that Quarkus won?
Yeah.
Based on the amount of questions, I at least know which is the best understandable, and also which raises the most amount of questions. So we'll see for ourselves.
Yeah, and if you want to see the actual source code, it's on screen. You can check that out and well, have a play with it yourself.
Yes.